So hello and welcome everyone. My name is Kirsikka Vaajakallio and I used to work as a design researcher at the Aalto University, and then last 8 years I have been working as a lead service designer and also been responsible of our employee experience at Hellon, which is a boutique customer experience and service design consultancy based in Helsinki and London. And my interest for the games is mainly, or I'm really like inspired by the games where is this interplay and element of luck and skills. So it's not just pure luck, but there is also, you can a little bit influence on the way that game will go based on your experience, and you will also then see quite easily if you play more and more that game that how much it will influence and impact on the results. So that's what I enjoy as playing games.
Yeah, and I'm Stefan Holmlid. I'm a professor at Linköping University. I've been there for many years. Maybe that's the best way to put it. My relationship to games is am maybe a role-playing nerd, but I'm very intrigued with games where you can could manipulate, for example, the dice. So the dice changes its function while you're playing with it, like Lego's dice. You can do that with, for example, and also games where all the elements of the game is also its rules, like Kalaha. That's the Swedish name of the game, at least, stones in holes, basically. And we will talk about design games and what they're good for in service design. And we will be doing this in 3 sections. So I'll give you a bit on the structure here. 3 sections. So there will be 3 presentations and a bit of discussion between me and Kirsikka in between. Where we try to capture some of the things that comes out of that. And just as Jonas said, we're recording. So if you need, you can change your name. It's also then important that you keep your microphone off, for example. Otherwise, there would be switching around for people who have their views set in certain ways so that the presentation may actually not be viewed for them. And there will be no general kind of open space for asking questions. Instead, we will use a structure where you will be reflecting a little bit, talking in small groups, and then sharing in the chat. But I'll get back to that. So it'll be after the first presentation, there will be a bit of self-reflection. After the second presentation, there will be small group discussions, very short and quick. So it'll be important that we keep time here, and I'll be making sure that you do that in your breakout rooms. And after the breakout rooms, you will be sharing an experience or sharing ideas that came out of, or insights, not ideas necessarily, but the insights that came out of your reflection group discussion. And that will be the kind of undercurrent for the questions or the things that we may capture in our discussions or our dialogue, me and Kirsikka's. Great. So Kirsikka, let's move on.
Okay, so I will briefly introduce that what do we mean by design games. And it depends on a little bit of the angle that you take on them, but we can say that it's not a totally new concept, but it has been around for a while. For example, it has been already in a different article since 80s, and it has been there from the beginning of the participatory design. So it has evolved, but the same basic principles are still there. There are different ways that you can look at design games, and in the history of design games, they've been used as a research tool to understand more about the certain concepts or learn about that. It has been used in the design schools for building design students' competencies. It has been used in the participatory design for empowering the users for the designs that relates to their own work, for example. And then it has been used for engaging multiple users and stakeholders during the design process. And this number D is maybe most close to how I've been utilizing and approaching and seeing design games. And when I talk about design games, what I typically want to address is that it's not the games as such, but it's the design games. And the design has a particular contextual meaning there, which influences that how the games look and feel like. And when I talk about here the design, it especially refers to this like a participatory design roots that there are. And meaning this focusing on exploring, sharing and creating, and this empathic approach towards different stakeholders, and also like a design process organized based on a customer or user understanding. Then when I'm talking about that it's part of the design process, so it's not the whatever design method, but there is this game element really important there. So that's why it's design games. And what do I mean by the game part then? That's about the play qualities, meaning different characters of the design games that creates this kind of a play spirit. And the play spirit is actually the super important and the key thing there. So it doesn't matter so much that what kind of elements or physical formation the game takes. It may be more like a performative thing, or it may be like acting out some situations, or it may be more like a tangible board game or card play or something like that. But the important thing is that there is this play spirit in this event. And that play spirit helps transporting a participant to this kind of a little bit another world, like a magic circle, which is at the same time physical and the mental space. And why it's important is that based on the research, people are more easy to think about different alternatives, and they are more relaxed when they are in this play spirit, in this magic circle. And in the games, when you are in this kind of magic circle, you can typically think at the same time the past, the future, and the current, the existing situation. And that's, of course, in the design, really important thing. And another like a bit really central play quality there is that there is some sort of rules. Sometimes the rules are really evident and clear and explicit, sometimes not so, but they have been there at least when designing the game. And the rules are somehow influencing or guiding the interaction that takes or happens while playing the game. And at the same time, the rules creates this kind of positive tension that we are familiar with the typical games that we are playing in the free time. But so this is the important part of the design games, that it's both built on the design and built on the games, but it's not none of them as a separate thing. Then from this perspective, when we think about the design games, the purpose and main qualities, so the design games are guided by rules that put emphasis on the dialogue. So it supports sharing the personal experiences and thoughts while playing the game. And it's at the same time, it creates a common language and shared understanding of a certain topic. And also it's at the same time open for several interpretations. So typically there is no winning or losing. There may be, but that's not like a driving force there. Unlike, for example, in many games we play on the free time, or like a typical serious games, which has a lot of similarities with the design games. It also allows taking different roles, so like role playing or like stepping into someone else's shoes, so that kind of things, different perspectives. And that also helps for co-learning while engaging with different perspectives. So quite often they are used to understand the different needs and context of the customers or users or other stakeholders. And then they are also at the same time promoting a creative and explorative mindset. So they facilitate the players in envisioning and enacting that what could be. So it's not just what is, but it typically has an element of what could be as well. And the materials are important there, although I said that it depends on how you are orchestrating the design game, that whether it's more performative or like more like a tangible board game kind of thing, for example. But anyway, there are some sort of tangible materials involved. And those are typically at the same time conceptual and concrete, working as boundary objects, and which are open for several interpretations again, and they provoke several senses and forms of expression. In the picture, there is one design game that has been utilized in the city of Helsinki context and the participation of the citizens. In my doctoral thesis, I was focusing on the design games, and I was identifying 3 different perspectives for the design games in co-design setting, where you want to utilize them especially to highlight the exploratory, imaginative, dialogical, and empathic aspects of co-design. These 3 are design games as a tool, design games as a mindset, and design games as a structure. And if I just briefly tell about the first one, so design games as a tool, so that's mainly the perspective of the product or service designer who needs to organize the design process and who needs to think about that how I can actually involve and engage different people. So then they are as a tool for organizing this dialogue, supporting the empathic understanding, and gaining several contributions. And again, here in this part, the design is this practical application context where this design game is utilized. And of course, it gives some sort of objectives and characteristics and the baseline, what kind of game it is that you are going to design. And I think that I'm ready to move on the discussion here.
So, I mean, one thing that I'm fascinated with about these design games is this, or this is a question to you, rather. It has to do with my fascination, but it's a question. So, it has its roots partly in the cooperative design movement in the Scandinavian countries or Nordic countries. Would you say that that's one of the reasons why competition is not so important in design games?
That's a really good point. That now when you put it that way, I haven't been thinking it that much, but yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that there is a really important this equal participation, and to have this like a quite neutral and equal setting where different perspectives can meet without the negative conflict. But that the conflict can be also like the positive tension there. So if you introduce the competition part, it may take focus away from this more neutral like discussion platform.
Yeah, and so how and what role would you say that the game world, the immersion into a game world, how important is that in that sense?
I think, like I said, that the immersion into game world, it's really matters that if you are able to create this kind of play spirit or this feeling that at the same time you are dealing with the everyday problems and challenges there, but you have more freedom of exploring in this imaginative world. Like in the games, you are always allowed to think about differently because you don't need to yet think there that, okay, this is how this influences now to my work or my life or something like that. So it's a good testing place in that sense for different kind of ideas that how they could work like without yet deciding that this is the direction where I want to go or we should go.
So it's part simulation and part play,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why I think there is a link to these serious games in a sense that there is this element of playing out different scenarios. So thinking about that, what if we take this path, how could it look like? And what if we take this path, how could it look like? But it's also always quite open still for these different kind of interpretations and making sense together.
So, I mean, because that's one thing, right? Serious games, and we have gamification, and we have design games, and so what's actually the difference?
Yeah, what do you think? What would you say that the difference between these? I play back this to you.
Yeah. So maybe I was onto something when I was thinking about the cooperative design movement, right? That gamification, it's, for example, is more about taking something that is not necessarily game-like from the beginning and making introducing game elements into it, and more into something that is part of our everyday life, maybe like, you know, cooking or training, or now I don't have my training watch on, right? But all those things. So it's introducing those elements and making it a little bit competitive. It may still be a group competition, right? Not necessarily a head-to-head kind of competition, but it's still, there is a sense of winning or not winning something, playing about something. That's kind of my thinking about gamification, at least. And serious games, it's to me at least, I don't know that much about serious games other than those that have been introduced in for elderly care, for example, where it's more about making games so that you will do something, right? Move more or train your balance or whatever. While these the design games are more about making people imagine new ways and new worlds and whatever. Would you say that's a fair kind of mapping of that? Or
yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I also think that characteristics and typical for design games is that there is no right or wrong answers in a sense, because that's also part of this collaboration there, that you rather have triggers to discuss or examples to bit of guide your thinking, but it's something, there is no like answers in a sense. Like maybe in these serious games, for example, you may have a little bit more like right way to play the game in a sense. And design games are quite open even for that quite often. And of course, if we think about it, that this like a participatory design background, so that has been quite strongly as a part of the development process. To create this common understanding and bring different perspectives together and learn from each other and build this coherent and consistent view on something to be designed. So maybe that's also that it's has been quite strong in the development processes, although like our last part we'll discuss a bit, but I have been moved a little bit away from that, and I still think that the games that I'm designing are design games. So I think it's a little bit of blurry, but I think you put it good way.
So I would also like to hear a little about this time lapse thing. So what it was like before and the future and now. So what does design games kind of provide in that kind of context?
I think that for the designers, that's of course really easy to move between these times in everyday job. So that's part of the training and the thinking that you have. But when you start bringing different stakeholders and customers and users, which may not have that kind of training or thinking naturally. So in the design games, you can provide, for example, the snippets from the experiences, customer data, for example, and build a discussion around to understanding and discussing first that what is this past experiences that we have gathered here, and then sharing your own, and then building from that, okay, what could be the future experiences where we would like to move on and so on. And that's maybe one like a perspective here. But so I think that like this, I have here this, that the design games as a mindset. So I think that comes back also to this play spirit and discussion. But when you have this kind of, for the players, the design games appear as this kind of mindset that helps you to transport into this other world and then going in these different time lapses. And so it guides those people who are not used to do it maybe naturally. So there's a materials and there's maybe these rules and something like that process that helps you to go there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of so role-playing games with portals, for example, time portals, where you can switch back and forth in time and change things in history so that the things you try to do in the current play situation is actually changed. So yes. I mean, games in this sense actually opens up for that, right? To experiment with that at least. So you can change historical decisions in your own. I mean, just think about now. This will be a parallel, right? But a traditional design process where you work with alternatives, and you start sketching your alternatives, and you go forward, pick one, and make new alternatives, and then you realize that was a bad choice for some reason, right? And you can go back to your alternative list and say, okay, so let's take another one. So that's also then of course possible in a design game to do that, but at larger scale and not necessarily only on the individual kind of design routes.
And maybe the design games, like one of the last one that I've been designing is about the desirable futures and backcasting from there, that how we can build the path towards the future that we would like to have. So I think this backcasting is a little bit also, so it's quite easy to put that as an element in a design game.
And that's interesting, and we'll so putting let's call them ordinary methods into design games and use them as game elements or game rules, maybe game mechanics.
Yes.
In a bit, I will be talking a little bit about the other way around and a bit of those purposes that we can have for design games. But before we do that, I would like all of you, I see in the chat that we got a couple of reflections and questions. That's fantastic, wonderful. And we'll get back to a bit of that later at least. But right now, I would like you to just take a silent minute, to reflect on, and you'll get the question in the chat, so you know if you're wondering in your minds, you will have the question in the chat. So reflect a little bit on how design games would fit into your design processes, or challenges you see using design games in your design processes. So it doesn't have to be the positive things, it could also be the problematic things, right? So how would design games fit into your design processes? Take a short 1 minute silent reflection. So write down a little bit of what your reflections here, and you'll be using them a little bit later after this next part of the presentation. And you will share them in the group in the breakout room, and then share a little bit wider in the end. So write them down, and if you get more reflections during the next piece here, the next part, just write them down as your own individual reflections on how design games would fit into your design processes. All right, so what can we then use these design games for? Kirsikka has been talking about a little bit more generic, a little bit more general, the game spirit and everything, and maybe we'll get back to talking about what is that spirit anyways. But I'll start talking a little bit about about some experiences of what we can use design games for. And I thought I had, yes, now was very tiny. So I mean, Kirsikka talked about adding backcasting into into a game process, but it's also a very easy thing to add design or game elements, sorry, in other daily practices. So just using, for example, dice in meetings. Now this is storytelling dice that you see in the picture. It could be a traditional kind of six-sided dice that you use for making decisions, not necessarily that will hold forever, right? But in a meeting, that's a game world, right? You're out of the actual context that things are happening in, so you can use other ways of working there. So you can make choices there in meetings without rationale. It'll be, well, not haphazard, right? Because the choices you have usually are not haphazard, right? But there is a choice, and you can make that choice with the dice and try that out and see what would that mean. So just adding game elements into daily practices is a really, really easy thing to do. And in service design, of course, one of the obvious things is that when you build these desktop walkthroughs, there will be a role playing happening there, right? So you can view the desktop walkthrough or the desktop model, the miniature, as Johan Blomqvist would say, just as a miniature. But as soon as you start doing things with that, that has to do with how a service is played out in that miniature, it's actually you're adding then a game element onto that materialization of the servicescape or the service context. And of course, there are other things from Kirsikka's presentation about these elements of games that you can that can be added to other contexts, of course. Another obvious way of using them is these games is to use them in insight generation. So what happens with having a game world and rules and game mechanics and materials that you're handling is that it complements usually beyond the actual context that you're interested in. So you may be doing an ethnographic study or an interview study, contextually based maybe, but that will be restricted by the context that you're in, by the actual person and that person's experiences that person at that point in time wants to activate. So what happens is that you can open up and unlock these structural limitations, and you can ask people to reflect back on, and it also reflects back on that current situation. So they may get inspiration to get insights about what they're doing. And this is, of course, super important in when we think about it as a co-design process or a cooperative or participatory design process, which also then directs it towards that these processes that we're then setting up is not only by and for the designers. So we're not only there as designers to extract information that we use in our own situations later on. And it's not only for and by the organization. So it becomes a sharing there, just like Kirsikka was saying before, where probably also part of the stuff that is happening in those situations, just as any contextually relevant kind of research and insight generation process, it will feed back into what is happening in that organization and with those people that are actually already then participating. So in that sense, it works in insight generation also as sensitizing. So you will start to, for all those in the service system that you're engaging in that service system and engaging with, they will start to be also thinking about these topics that you introduce and whether or how or whether or not it can be actually any change happening around there. Method-wise, of course, also there will be sensitizing. So if you use simple, like this very, very tiny game that Mina was working with, it's very portable and it's quick. It's a 5-minute game that you can play with anyone at any point in time. Just by having these little easy peasy things to run, you will also help people to understand that we'll be working in other ways. So method-wise, it may also be even if it doesn't generate any real insights, it will be sensitizing towards methodological work. In concept exploration, of course, that's maybe the thing that we see a lot when it comes to design games. So using design games to test new or come up with new ideas and try out concepts, and just like Kirsikka was saying, in this game world, that is partly a simulation and partly not a simulation of what we're currently looking at. We can do things that we couldn't do and make combinations that are not available in the real world, and then explore these concepts there in new ways. And here games helps us to provide triggers. So just by handling materials, like in the bottom right here, by handling these cards, something is happening with people that are handling that material. And we got that question about online gaming, right, in this space, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But that's of course the difference, right? So you will not be handling the things in the same way when you're online. But you can provide these triggers, and you can change those triggers, and you can combine those triggers, and you can even ask for people to show you what the triggers are, so you can build further on the game and the game rules, so the game actually becomes part of a co-constructed game in the end. It also allows for reframing, of course. So because when you're in that simulation or in that game world, there's no stake for the participants. So that's the point with the cooperative design movement here, right? So if you can move back and make people feel that they are in a space where it's safe to suggest things that are out of bounds usually, then there will be no stake, and people can actually work in other ways. This is of course a difficulty, especially when you work in cross cultures or in organizations where within organizations where there is a stake, depending on at what level you will be working. So it may take a lot of work for the game facilitator here to make sure that the composition of people there playing the game is a composition where this reframing and there is no stake for the participants. Another thing that is happening in these situations, not only in concept exploration, but it's this the Ken Feingold quote here, that as a facilitator here, one needs to be open for all those unexpected things that people will be doing in the games that you didn't, when they become participants in that game, and all those expected things that they don't do at all. So keeping an open mind for that is a really important thing when working with these games, because maybe that's one of the more important pieces that happens in those games, the things that people do that you didn't expect, and all those things that you would like them to do that they never do. As a final thing here for this little section, game structures, rules, etc., can also be used as mediators for knowledge exchange. So this is an old game by Lisa Malmberg that was played with a couple of these tables, and you can see the game board here, and you see well, maybe you don't see, but I'll point you to it at least. There's a game, a character sheet in front of the persons here, and they're playing in pairs here. So there was a goal, a direct result of playing this game. That was kind of the one of the reasons for playing the game, for people to join the game. But there was also an indirect purpose, that these people that were around the table would start talking about and sharing knowledge and sharing insights about their positions as stakeholders, their positions as elderly people, and problems and situations. And here are scenarios and whatever. So there was an idea generation kind of thing, and selection and prioritization. But one of the indirect purposes was that when these people, they come from different organizations, when these people talk in each pair, when they talk about that specific game character, the character sheet, and what is in that sheet and how that character behaves, the indirect purposes are to facilitate creating common ground, right? And in the end, that facilitates diversity, the possibility to not be locked into positions and frames, but making sure that a lot of different voices can be heard. And here you can use a lot of different tools from the game elements to do that, right? The game boards and rules can be the main part in that, or the scenarios and characters can be the main part in making that happen. And of course, the role of the game master here will be the facilitator over here, will be really important to make sure that the flow is there still, and it feels like that we have that game spirit there still, and doesn't really only focus then on the indirect purpose, because then you can't use the platform to create these new thinking and new ideas. I would now like you to, I will set you up in breakout rooms, and it will be 3 in each breakout room. That's what I think will be most relevant. Let's see here. Yeah, it would be 3 or 4 people in each room, and take 3 minutes. Share your ideas about how design games would fit into your design processes. And when we come out of that, I'll close the breakout rooms when there is 1 minute left, so you will see that happen. Don't feel stressed out about that. Just talk and share, and you will see how it works. And if you, when you come back, I will ask you to share in the in the chat again, and you will see there will be kind of a waterfall kind of sharing of ideas from that. So after you have been discussing, you will share 1 or 2 things that you think were interesting, important, or whatever as a comment in the chat. But first, go into those breakout rooms and talk a little bit about how design games would fit into your design processes. So people are coming back here, and please share 1 or 2 thoughts from your what you've been, your reflections and your discussions. There's a guiding question there in the chat, so just write them in, and we'll give that a little bit of a minute. Just put them in, and we'll have a lot of different ideas and questions and challenges and possibilities there. We will, of course, not be able to answer all these questions, right? Because there will be a lot of them. Yeah, so Julia is talking about simulating healthcare processes. So looking for symptoms and pathways. I mean, that's probably that's definitely a possibility. In finding ways of using, Miran Leander is both stating and asking how we can use design games to increase intrinsic motivation to change behavior. Yeah, I mean that would be kind of an indirect purpose for a game to push people to do things in new ways. And we had a question before about these putting people in the right mood or mindset, and Lisa is then connecting to that. Or I'm making the connection there with facilitating uncomfortable discussions. So making sure that people feel comfortable having uncomfortable discussions, or maybe reframing the uncomfortable discussion into something else, and then using this game world thing, or the maybe the metaphorical way of thinking about how a game can be set up. Games for addressing budgets. That's a really interesting thing, Kalle. Kirsikka, there was a question about this online versus physical games. Maybe yes. You have a comment on that, maybe.
Yeah, I think there was already a good comments also in the chat about it, but I think that there is a couple of issues. The preparation is, of course, always super important in the design games, and it typically, no matter which kind of design game, it takes a little bit more time to prepare than the maybe more typical post-it based workshop, for example. But it's quite often pays off as well. But maybe in this online setting, so we've been now using, for example, Miro for that, and we have had the same game, this futures game that we've been developing during the autumn we started in the online setting, but then we wanted in the small group to test it as a game, like a tangible physical game setting as well, because we were also interested in that what do we lose when we are in the Miro context, which is not best for this game experience. Of course, you can have other online platforms, but then it cost more and to make it there. So the Miro was a simple, easy we are using anyway. And what I think that there is something that you are losing when you don't have the tangible thing. So it's easier to bring people into this magic circle and play spirit when you are using the tangible dice or playing cards or sheet of rules. But you can have the similar things or elements in there. I think the rules, for example, is one of really important piece of paper, kind of sense that we know that in the games there are some sort of rules. And the quite funny fact based on the research is that actually people in the workshops, they are more willing to follow the rules by the game than the facilitator. so you can hand that over, for these rules. And then also it's not you who is saying what to do, but it's more neutral again in a sense. So that can be, of course, still part of the online gaming and the materials, but it demands the online game in this sense when it's not designed as a game. But more like this still a workshop kind of setting, but through these game elements. So it needs quite a lot of facilitation so that it goes smoothly and you get the people in the same feeling. And you need to really think about what are these play elements that you introduce, the luck and chance and these kind of things that the surprises that comes there or something like that, which gives this feeling of game.
Right, and before we move on to the final section, there is this question that Juliane asked about when not to use design games. When is it not appropriate or meaningful? Do you have any reflections on that?
I think that one thing is, of course, that like I said, that it takes time to create a good design game. It's not as simple as it sounds. so if you have a super busy timetable, for example, and you don't have this, I have a lot of these half-ready games that I can just change a little bit the rules and play it again with a different angle. But if you don't have anything that, then you should design it from the scratch. So it may not be worth of that. So you may have other methods, for example. Also, sometimes it may be that you don't need that kind of explorative setting or role playing, so that you can do it some other mediums better. What would you say?
Yeah, so I'm kind of thinking that if there's no room for reframing in the project or in the setup, then probably a design game would be the not a good approach, right? So it's about the context and how the project is framed. And also, of course, if people, like we had in one of the questions, if people are not if they are afraid, so to speak, like you could be technology kind of afraid, you could be game afraid, then of course it may not work, right? So then it's more of a social and personal thing. And also, I mean, I was talking about this in organizations or between cultures. If you don't know the cultural differences, for example, in losing face and whatever between or within the organizational culture or between the levels of an organization, maybe games is not the best way to go unless you have a good supporter in the organization that can help you handle that in the end, especially if you're going in as a consultant. So Kirsikka, let's move on to the third section here.
So a little bit of, we were thinking about talking about the design games as an outcome of the design process rather than part of the designing something in a sense. And again, this is then interesting that whether these are still the design games or not. But what we have been discussing with Stefan now, so taking that as background, so I think that the design games are quite good for organization transformation, for example. But in those cases, it has been the end result in a sense that it's not the design part of the design process, but it rather as a tool for the organization to have a dialogue and exploration around a certain topic. In this case, for example, it's quite future visions of the organization or customer experience principles, or like in this picture, this is a prototype from design game done for the financial sector organization, which we created this kind of or help them to transform their brand identity into a more tangible customer experience, that how it actually comes visible and experienced by the customers in different ways. And there was a certain principles there and the topics that they wanted to that everyone understands, but it was not that there would be right or wrong answers again, but more like these kind of frames that the game gave to think about this customer experience from different perspectives, from your own work perspective and so on. So it was emphasizing this dialogue and collaboration across silos, so brought people together from a different part of organization and learning from and with from others in that sense. And it also helped to bring together different perspectives in equal setting again, so that it's not wrong that you have a bit different idea or something like that, but it's actually interesting and can be fruitful in these discussions. But it's easy to go that through with the game rules, and it promotes this new perspectives, mindset, and creative problem solving. And in this organization, they were a little bit bored of post-it sessions, so they were, I don't want to post it anymore. So but we at the same time we should be creating something together and exploring this together and so on. So they were super happy about the game approach, and the financial sector, they are quite competitive. So actually in this design game, we had a bit of the competition there as well as a side track, but so that they enjoyed that. And the brand is about the luxurious things and at the same time about the coziness, bringing those two things together. And that's why we use the champagne corks there as game pieces and so on. But then, for example, we've been using also design games for more like a sustaining part of the processes, that it's not just for going through some issues or learning together some topic, but more about the ongoing process. Like in the city of Helsinki, for example, we've been using design games for the development discussions. So they wanted a new, more flexible, modularized system, because there's a lot of different kind of employees in the city. So how the same model fits better for everyone and is flexible, and we utilize the game cards and game board and this kind of like a customer journey things there, and that was working quite nice, and that they still have it now at the moment for the organization. There is in the video in that in the net, but that's in Finnish, unfortunately, I think only that they have done. And maybe then my future dream came a little bit is this what we are doing at the moment already, that this or what we've been doing last autumn as part of this EU funded Creature project is this like a sustainable futures game, where we utilize the UN sustainability goals, but we bring the fiction and design and game elements together, and a bit different ways of try to trigger people's think about that, where the future dream or desired future, what it could be like, and what's the pathway there for the organization, what they stake there. So that's maybe it is that how they can be also like outcome. What about Stefan?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a really interesting aspect of games, where it seems as if some of these games were basically built for the organization, right? So that the organization then will use the game for their purposes. Is that the way? Yes. I should? Yeah.
Yes, I think in that sense it's like the end result of the design process, that they are asking us to do some sort of tool or help to implement things or something like that, for example. And that's the in that sense, it's more the outcome than if we think about the earlier design games in a participatory design or co-design process, where it's utilized exactly to, like you said there, to for example, share the experiences or gather the insights in order to design something based on that. Of course, there's a lot of ideas coming in these games as well, but
yeah, of course. So, what would you say the potential of driving change or transformation with design games? I mean, your experience from that is it actually working, or is it easy for the organization to take on the game and use that? Or
again, like you said, that it depends on the bit of the organization culture, of course, as well. Like this finance and sector company, that they really was super triggered in the really inspired by the idea that they can be playing a game there. But then when I was still working in the Aalto University, there was some of the challenges sometimes to get the some of the professors, for example, like you, there are the playful guys, but then there was the ones that who went that, okay, when they got the invitation that, it's about the design games, I don't play the games and, while I'm working. So of course, that's the one part of it to think about it, that how you introduce it also and how much you emphasize that it's okay. But I think it has a lot of good elements for organizations to apply in the different transformation processes when they want to co-learn things together and they want to like open up different perspectives and be open for different ideas.
Yeah, Pom in the chat, she was suggesting that the random element of games can help people to feel allowed to speak about things they otherwise might not dare to lift. So I guess that in that sense, a game world and the game mechanics can help us to actually make things more open than if we would be in the ordinary kind of setting then.
What would you think about this?
And also I was thinking.
Yeah, I was just thinking that what would you say that are the like?
Please, Kirsikka.
Yeah, what are the easy way to like apply design games or some of this ideology, because there was the discussion also that it's interesting, but it seems quite difficult. I should know a lot more in order to it. So what would you say for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably goes back to that finding ways of making simple games or using game elements in more daily practices. Just adding a game element to a design process, not necessarily making a design game, but starting out with adding game elements to the design processes that are already there. That could be one way of starting to think about how can we use it, what does it mean, what does that actually bring to us, rather than trying to make. No, I mean, we're looking at your dream game here, right?
Yeah.
Now that may be a too big leap for some to take at once. Others like to take those big leaps, and then probably you shouldn't just introduce dice into your decision making, but actually try to make a big game because it will engage many in trying to figure out how it works.
Yeah, I think the dice is a really good example. And the other one that I've been recognized that actually when you do whatever things that you have, but you make it into form of the playing card and you share those for the people. Of course, that's again a little bit easier in the face-to-face setting, but also possible in the online setting that you share those. And that moment of the feeling comes there that, my cards compared to your, now I have something different. So it's quite small thing and it already gives this feeling of a play spirit a little bit.
Yeah, and I was also thinking about that online playing then. I mean, one of the things here is, of course, that we also have when you go online, there is an easier element of cheating, especially if you ask people to throw dice, for example, in their own setting, and those dice will play out on something that happens online. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because then you will, if you can, as a designer, can then talk about that afterwards. So why were you making this move? Why were you making these decisions? Well, I got a 6, but that would have led to nowhere. So I thought it was better if it was as if I had got a 4, because then we would be able to move forward. So suddenly you get some of that rationale in again that is based on their real life settings. And I mean, you were talking about your dream game here. Just to round off before we let Jonas and Kalle really round off this little seminar. My dream game would be a game that is played over a long period of time, a year, maybe 2 years, and where in a lot of games you have to build resources to be able to move on, like the traditional kids games. You have to collect a key, a fish, and a witch, right, to be able to go through that door. And collecting those resources would be done in real life. So all the learning that happens would be done in the real organization, so this is a transformation game, right? But while in the game setting, you would be able to use the learnings you got from the real situations over that long period of time to play out different scenarios within the game. So that would be kind of a really taking that simulation versus reality into something that is more connected maybe than we usually do when we set up these short design games, which of course also is very common, right? But you were saying when we were preparing, you were saying that the one of these games actually were meant for a longer play session rather than just.
Yes, actually, this one is the futures, the sustainable futures game. We recognize that there's so many elements and dimensions that you can. It's now for 3 hours session because of that's the business people's time limit quite typically when it's like a one-off game session. But there's so many things that you could explore and you could bring a little bit like in this year longer term. That actually we've been thinking that it would be like super interesting to have a design process around this game, so that this would last like I don't know, 2 months or something like that, and the whole design process would be built around the game phases, so that instead of having 3 hours, it would have like several weeks or at least 3 weeks to play, and then in the between to always prepare a little bit more and have a thinking and then come back to the next stage of the game. So a bit similar in a sense that having a bit more time, that would be a perfect.
Yeah. Fantastic, and we got a lot of questions. Thanks everyone for both sharing your ideas and questions. Yeah. We will not be able to answer all of them. We expected to get a lot, right? But some of these maybe we can follow up afterwards in other media. But we're really happy that you all joined us this morning or evening or whatever time you have where you are. Thanks, everyone.